PNR with Adam R. Welcome to 3PNR. I'm your host, Adam R. And on this episode, I have Jeffrey Lewis, homicide cop from the Homicide Detective from Miami. Jeffrey, how you doing, sir?
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for being on. I greatly appreciate it.
No problem.
A lot to cover. Mostly, we're going to talk more about how you got involved with law enforcement. I want to gain an interest towards that.
Okay. Easy enough. Probably started when I was a youngster. My father was a reserve police officer in Columbus, Ohio, where I grew up. And across the street, our neighbor was a full-time Columbus, Ohio police officer. And he was a very big influence on myself and the other young kids in the neighborhood. And, of course, watching my dad and seeing what he did. And I just gained an interest at a very young age. And I made my career choice. I was probably about 13 or 14 years old when I decided I want to be a police officer.
That's good. And best time, because that's an absorbing stage, right? It's the best time to want to be involved.
Yeah, I think a lot of people develop an interest in what kind of job they want to have in their future at a younger age, at least back then, and I did. And now my goal was to get hired on a police department, and I had to figure out how to do that. I chose to go into the United States Air Force at 17 after I graduated high school, and I was they called it a security policeman in the Air Force, and they had it divided into security and law enforcement. Security basically guarded the aircraft on the flight line, while law enforcement handled the patrol duties, the gate duties, desk duties, that type of thing. So I was fortunate enough to be a law enforcement specialist in the Air Force, and my last 2 years I became an investigator within the law enforcement organization. So I was very fortunate to have been able to do that. Now what turned out to be most advantageous for me was I did this at Homestead Air Force Base. Homestead is south end of Miami-Dade County, and I became exposed to the Miami-Dade Police Department. Back then it was called the Public Safety Department. And I started to develop an interest in that police department, although I wanted to become a Columbus, Ohio police officer initially. I did take the test with Columbus, passed the test, but unfortunately back in those days, which was 1980, they had quotas to fill, and they were looking for minority officers as opposed to white male officers, so they didn't hire me. But in Miami in 1980, they had a huge riot called the McDuffie riots. And after that riot, thousands of officers quit the police department. Oh. Not only my department, but the City of Miami Police Department as well. Once that occurred, members from the Miami-Dade Police Department came down to the Air Force Base and basically recruited not only myself, but many other individuals to sign up with their police department. So that's what I did. And I was fortunate enough to be hired by the Miami-Dade Police Department in October of 1980. And that is where my career began in law enforcement, as far as in the civilian world.
I mean, Miami was you couldn't go wrong, right? It's beautiful out there. I mean, I live in Tampa, so
okay.
For the most part, it's beautiful here in Tampa. But Miami's that's the go-to spot, or at least definitely was in the 80s, 90s, no question.
Well, in 1980, now this is pre-Miami Vice days. This is pre-South Beach. Dade County was a very nice area to live in. You didn't have as much crime and traffic and those kind of problems initially, but and it is beautiful. The beaches are beautiful. The weather's great, except for hurricane season. And for me, it turned out to be a perfect fit. So when I got on in 1980, I was initially assigned to what they call the Midwest District, which was around the Miami International Airport, Sweetwater area. It was a heavy Hispanic community. that was basically handling a lot of burglaries and car accidents and domestic violence calls and things like that. Within a month, I was transferred to the Central District, and that district encompasses what is known as Liberty City. And Liberty City is where they had the May 80 riots, and it was an inner city area. You had middle class, you had poor folks, you had a high crime rate and a big distrust of the police because of the riots. A lot of crime, and that's where I wanted to be once I got there. I found my calling. I was assigned to the midnight shift in that district, along with other individuals that I was in the Air Force with. So it worked out real well for me initially.
Yeah, and you're obviously a go-getter. There's no question, right? Because that's you hit the ground running. You got right into the area where it was the most issues were taking place, and that caught your interest, which is a good thing, right?
Oh yeah, you want to be a police officer, especially in those days. Central District in Miami-Dade County was probably the best place in the country to become a police officer because that's where the action was. And it was exciting. It was interesting. It was dangerous. It was fun. It was great officers to work with. Just everything about it was perfect for me. And I was all of 21 years old and still really didn't know what the hell I was doing. But every day was a new learning experience for me. It didn't take long before I found out how dangerous it was. Within 2 weeks of being on my squad, 2 fellow officers were shot in an ambush on a night shift. A couple weeks later, another officer was ambushed and shot on another squad. And so within a month and a half, I'd already been exposed to that. And then a couple months later, another officer was shot as he was trying to arrest a rapist. And then about a year later, one of my fellow officers on my squad had to shoot and kill somebody. So I saw a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I had to learn real quick to survive that district.
People got to understand, police, like military, they're going to do the things that other people don't desire to do. You're putting yourself in danger every single time. And
You are.
That's what, and I was talking to Lenny DePaul about this earlier in the week. And I understand to want to protect yourself. If you're involved with an officer and you feel like, something's inappropriate or you don't feel comfortable, I get recording. What I don't understand and I don't appreciate, I really look down upon, are these people with cameras going to police stations or just in general provoking police for, I guess, YouTube likes. I don't get that.
Yeah, I don't either. To me, that is one of the most disgusting acts that occur nowadays. I mean, I've seen these videos where, officers will be minding their own business, taking a little lunch break, and somebody will walk up and start cursing at them and pointing the camera at them, calling them racist, trying to provoke them.
Right. Yeah.
It's basically what they want to do. And, the officer has no recourse but to turn his back and walk away. If it was up to me, it would be against the law to do that and a misdemeanor and enable the officers to arrest these individuals. That would definitely stop that type of activity. It's no good for anyone. It's no good for the officers. It's no good for the people doing it. And it's definitely no good for the citizens because you're basically turning your officers against the same people that need their protection. And,
right.
And it's just nothing aggravates me more than to see those videos.
Yeah. And then you put this into perspective. These same people that are doing this in their neighborhood, like, honestly, if shit hits the fan, and there's crime going on, you're calling the police. You're not going out there with your camera to correct the problem. You know what I mean? Again, I do understand protecting yourself in situations where you're pulled over and you don't feel comfortable. Like, I'm not saying, like, even for me, if I'm pulled over, I'm not the first thing in my instinct is not pull the camera out. I don't feel guilty. And if I notice something's inappropriate or I feel something's wrong, by all means, record at that point. But don't go provoking problems. That's uncalled for. You know what I mean?
Well, nowadays, I mean, the majority of uniformed police officers have a body cam on. That body cam is going to be turned on every time they conduct a traffic stop or an effect an arrest or whatever situation they're in. So you don't need to turn your camera on. It's going to be there. It's recorded. It can't be tampered with. It can't be turned off. If it is turned off, if the officer's doing something wrong, then that'll come out. if you have a complaint against them. So again, the pulling of the camera out aggravates the officer. Okay. And there might be a situation where it's a simple traffic stop that you may get a warning where now you provoke the officer. You're not getting a warning. You're going to get a ticket. Yeah. And if it's an arrestable offense, you're going to go to jail because now you have initiated a situation that's not going to be good for you in the end. Because if the officer is doing what he's able to do and supposed to do, and not violating any laws or violating anybody's rights, you're done.
Yeah,
and you brought it upon yourself. And I don't blame any officer that would act that way.
Yeah, and flip it around. Now, here's the flip side to that. These officers are now alienated, a bit shunned, because they have to concern for this. And let's say a kid goes missing, and now officers have to conduct an investigation, and they can't conduct it adequately in fear that whoever they're investigating is going to turn around and record them. Or, it's just too easy for cops to fall under fire when they're just trying to do their job. You know what I mean? And are there some bad cops? Sure. But there's a bad everybody. Everyone's got a bad something, period. You know what I mean? And it's not fair.
I always said, how would a school teacher, a doctor, a nurse, anybody like it if somebody came up to them while they're doing their job and put a camera on them and started cursing at them and cussing at them and threatening them and antagonizing them? Yeah. What would their reaction be? So why is it okay to do that to a police officer, but it's not okay to do it to anybody else? That is the way I feel about that.
And here's another thing too. Nighttime, cop makes a pullover. Some crony standing off in the distance with a camera is trying to get a better shot. Listen, cops get shot at all the time, and especially at nighttime. And if you're approaching them from their back, you better believe I'm not even a cop, and I would react negatively to someone walking behind me in the middle of the night. Period.
Absolutely. Listen, when it comes down to if I fear for my safety, I don't give a shit if you have a camera on me or not. I'm going to do what I have to do to make sure I'm safe so that I go home at the end of my shift. So if you want to take that chance and sneak up behind me, if I pull somebody over and you want to put a camera in my face and I think you're putting something else in my face, that's going to be on you. Okay. Right. Now, this is how it is today. Okay. Now, I've been retired since 2010. I do volunteer work with the Seminole County Sheriff's Department. I'm around officers quite a bit. I deal with officers like I'm doing this podcast with you. I've done it with others, and I'm in a constant contact with some of my friends still working. The bottom line is this. A lot of these police officers today are now used to these cameras, okay? It's nothing new. As a matter of fact, they are shocked when somebody isn't videotaping them with a camera. So their responses today are not going to be as shrill as they were before because now they're used to it and it's no big deal. They're used to getting cursed at and yelled at on camera. Now, if you start threatening them, then they will take the action necessary to ensure their safety. And that's the bottom line. It's, they don't, I don't think people understand two things about police officers. When you walk out the door, you don't walk out the door wanting to kill somebody, okay? Nobody does. And I have plenty of friends that have had to kill people. I never had, thank God. But I guarantee you, when we had our roll call, they didn't go into the roll call and say, I'm going to kill somebody tonight. No. The other thing is they don't want, and I didn't want physical confrontation. If I have to arrest you, the last thing I want to do is fight. I don't want to get hurt. I don't want my uniform to get torn up. I don't want to get scratched up. I don't want to go to the hospital. I would rather you comply with the orders that I give you. Put your hands behind your back. Let me cuff you up and take you to jail. All right.
And or just figure things out, right? Like that's another thing.
Well, people of course. Listen. No police officer wants to fight everybody they have to arrest.
Right.
All right. And especially now when you do have to fight somebody, this is the other problem with the cameras is 10 people will put a camera on you while you are now trying to keep yourself from getting harmed and killed. And unfortunately, you have to do things to the other person that doesn't look good on camera.
Yep.
Right. And that's the shit that goes YouTube or goes on TV. While all you wanted to do was effect an arrest, take the guy in, go to court, work it out. And believe me, that's 99% of every police officer in every city in this country today. And they want to go home at the end of their shift. They don't want to get hurt. They don't want to get killed. And they don't want to see any of that happen to anybody they work with as well.
Yeah.
So it's a tough road to hoe initially. And now it's been made harder by those folks that want to resist arrest, by those folks that want to put the camera in your face, by those folks that want to antagonize you, and by the folks that criticize everything you do and call you a racist and call you a KKK person or a white supremacist, when all you're trying to do is make a living, get the bad guys off the street, and go home at the end of your shift.
You know, a lot of that's manipulation to get out of a situation. And,
Sure.
The guy that's running around, I seen the videos, this guy running around like, oh, it's the First Amendment, and he's trying to quote law. Listen, go to college, become a lawyer, and fight for rights that way. What are you doing with a video camera on a broad daylight, no job? What are you doing with yourself? And I don't want to hear First Amendment warrior. That makes no sense to me. You're doing nothing. Part of the reason I reached out to you is I see you on LinkedIn. You're constantly, everything you do is community related, right? It's service, community, public. It shows that you care about community and the public interest.
Well, let me just say this. This is another facet of police life that a lot of people either aren't aware of, or they don't hear it enough, or they are jaded by all the negativity. Every police officer that does this job does it because they want to help somebody. They want to get the bad guy off the street. They want to help the person in the accident. They want, these calls, a lot of calls are mundane calls. I had a call when I was in uniform at working a midnight shift at 6 a.m. I'm ready to get off to go to a trailer park to assist a lady. You know what we had to do? We had to literally, she couldn't walk out of her trailer. She was sitting in a chair. Me and my partner had to pick the chair up with her in it, and she was no lightweight, and literally carry her out of the trailer and put her outside of the trailer on the ground in her chair. Okay. But you know what? I remember that to this day. That was over 30 years ago. And I laughed about it, and I didn't really care because, that's what I signed up for. Yep. If I didn't want to do that kind of work, I would do something else. And that's the main mindset of every police officer that goes, we want to help people. Listen, you have trouble crossing the street. I want to get out of the car and help you cross the street. You're the victim of a robbery. You're the victim of a burglary. You're the victim of an auto theft. Your daughter's missing. Somebody got killed in your family. I want to be the person to make you feel better. And every police officer out there is that police officer. Now, listen, yes, there are guys out there, girls out there, women out there that maybe don't have that attitude. They're very far and few between. Very far and few, because you have to put in a lot of work and a lot of study and a lot of family life to do this job.
Yep.
So you're not going to sacrifice all that if you don't want to really help people when the bottom line is helping somebody, no matter what the call is. And we had a saying, no call too small.
Yeah. And, I commend you for that. I commend all law enforcement for that, because try to imagine a world where you didn't have the buffer of law enforcement. Like the guy next door you can't stand. How do you solve that issue without the buffer of law enforcement?
Right.
It's ugly fast.
Well, and you say that, and what have I heard for the last year, aside from defund the police? They want to do this, reimagine the police department, whatever the hell that means. I have no idea how you reimagine. You know who's not going to change?
The criminals.
Citizens.
The criminals are not going to change. They're actually going to improve.
The people that need the police. You can do all the training and all the reimagining and all the bullshit you want with a police officer and a police department. It doesn't matter, because the civilian world doesn't change at all.
Right.
And you still need to answer those calls. You still have people shot, robbed, murdered, burglarized. Crime is going to actually, crime is on the rise right now. There's no worse time in this country's history to try to defund or reimagine the police than there is today. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, when I first heard this defund the police thing, the first thing that came to my mind was ancient Rome. And in ancient Rome, when it got to the point where they weren't respecting authority, what did they do? They killed the Caesar. So,
of course,
and no one was there to stop them.
If you have chaos in it, listen. You know what a riot is? A riot is chaos in the streets. Okay. I was in 4 riots in Miami after the McDuffie riot. And you feel powerless because there's really nothing you can do. As well trained as we were. And our department was probably the best trained in the country for riot control, because we had just gone through the McDuffie riot. And they had to figure out a way to try to keep innocent people that were coming into the neighborhood from getting killed. So they developed what they called the mobile field force. And the sergeant, my old sergeant, Bob Edwards, who's now deceased, he went around the country teaching that technique to every major police department in the country. When you see riot control in Los Angeles or New York or in these major cities, that was learned from Bob Edwards via the Miami Dade Police Department, because we had to learn it the hard way. And when you have constant rioting or constant demonstrations where they're destroying, looting, and burning, and even when you're told to go in there and take care of it, you still really can't, because you're outnumbered, you're outgunned.
Yep.
And again, now you got the cameras, and now you've got, people with masks on. You can't even identify these people. And then when you do make the arrest for the looting and the rioting and the burning and the torching and the burglarizing and all that kind of shit, what happens to these people you arrest? You take them in, and these new prosecutors nowadays, they let them go. They drop all the charges.
Yeah.
These progressive prosecutors that are politically aligned with the left, or with the criminals, I should say, they don't want to prosecute these people. They want to give them excuses to riot. And what happens? They do it again. They keep doing it over and over and over and over. And if that continues, that's when you're going to start having real problems. I mean, we got through a year of it. I don't know if this country can stand a year or two of that before something really starts to happen.
I strongly feel that we need, and this why I'm calling more. I'm inviting more police onto the show. I cover a lot of stuff: UFOs, ghosts, just all the interesting stuff. But at the end of the day, I want more cops, because we need to. I would prefer that the world look differently upon law enforcement. You have to view a world without it. Not only that, but view it in part of, like, forget criminals. I always say this: forget criminals. A little girl goes missing. What better network of people could build a dragnet per se, to find this little girl? You're not going to get your neighborhood to do, not as well organized, not with the great communications of law enforcement. There's more than just the purpose of just criminals too. People seem to forget that. It's an important, viable part of the community, period.
I think that the elites forget that. You know who doesn't forget that? You know who knows that better than anybody? Every person that lives within every inner city of every city in this country. Believe it or not, those people, 90% of them, not only respect the police, they demand that the police are in their neighborhoods. They want the police in their neighborhoods, and they need the police in their neighborhoods, and they know it. I mean, I can tell you stories, handling homicide investigations and doing area canvasses and knocking on people's doors in some of these areas. And what happens is these are African Americans. They invite you in the house and they go, "Detective, listen, I want to talk to you, but I want to do it behind closed doors." Because they don't want the bad folks out there to see them cooperating with the police, because they're scared for their life. And these people live with bars on their windows and bars on their doors and guns in their houses. They live next door to the thugs that run the neighborhoods. And they're hardworking, decent, law-abiding citizens. They're the ones getting victimized. It's their kids that are being shot and murdered. They're the ones being robbed, and their houses are being burglarized. They want the police in those neighborhoods. Who comes in there and says defund the police? It's white liberals. They don't even live in those neighborhoods. They're the ones that say, and then you get the Black Lives Matter group, okay, that all they're doing is making money off the misery of the victims that live in these neighborhoods. If you look at Chicago, every weekend, you have 30 to 40 people shot every weekend. And out of those 30 or 40 that are shot, you might get 5 to 10 that are killed, including children, okay? Not one time, and I read this every weekend. This is something I do. I've been following this for minimum 2 years in Chicago. Not one weekend have I heard or seen anybody from Black Lives Matter or any Democrat or any left-wing politician go into Chicago and say, "We need to put an end to this." Why is that? These are black people being killed by black people. These are black babies and black kids being killed by black people, gang members, drug dealers. And yet not one person, I haven't heard anybody from Black Lives Matter offer to pay for funeral services for these poor people that live in these neighborhoods, offered up rewards to capture the guys that are doing the killing. I haven't heard any of that. Why is that?
I was talking to Michael Sinsinski about that. He's a homicide detective, and he was talking about the Chicago incident. It's not just unfortunate. It's hard to swallow. It's difficult to listen to because it's happening, and it's happening at a horrible rate. Like
It's out of control. Listen, my hometown of Columbus, Ohio, they're going to set a homicide record this year because they have a left wing, and I don't be political, but I'm going to be truthful. You have a liberal mayor who wants to defund the police, who does not back his police officers. Okay. You have a liberal city council. They coddle the criminals, and that's in every major city, New York City, Chicago, LA, San Francisco. The murder rate in Columbus, Ohio, where I grew up, on the streets that I used to play, somebody's getting shot and killed almost every night, and nobody says a word about it. And that just pisses me off. And I don't get it. I don't understand it, and I never will.
I agree. I mean, it's a tragedy to listen to. And I think, I talk about this with the UFO people a lot because I get this question often on off-air interviews. And they're like, well, when are we going to know? When do we have contact? Well, I'll tell you when. When we stop having division amongst us. There's no way you're going to expect something super intelligent to talk to us when we have more reasons to divide than we do to come together. We need more unity in people and community. It's important. Like, other countries are laughing at us right now. We look foolish, sure. And it upsets me, Yeah,
it upsets a lot of people. And I will say this. I think slowly pendulum is swinging back, because there comes a certain point where even those individuals that do not like the police are starting to realize, you know what, we do. Look what they did in Minneapolis. They had it on the ballot to literally get rid of the police department. Well, the people that lived there, decided, no, you know what, we need a police department. So I think people are waking up to that fact and seeing that, we had a good run. We tried it. It was fun. It was interesting. Got a lot of press. Bottom line is you can't do it. You need a policeman out there, and more people, the people, not necessarily the politicians, but the people are understanding of that.
Yeah. I mean, listen, when you hear things like defund police and remove police departments, there are organizations of criminals, sociopaths that are just drooling at the sound of that, right? For them, it's payday. And it doesn't matter who's going to get in their way.
Today is the best time to be a criminal. If you're going to be a criminal, if you wanted to be a criminal, go to San Francisco. You can shoplift every day up to $900 worth of merchandise. Not have to worry about. Go to New York City. You can rob people, push them in front of a subway. Yeah, you might get arrested, but within an hour, you're going to be released. You don't have to post a bond or a bail.
Isn't that crazy to say? Like, hearing that, it sounds nuts. Right.
It is nuts.
And that's so this reverts back to the reason behind this. I get it. An incident happened. Justice wasn't served, although in the end it was served. It was served in the end. But
somebody went to prison over that.
Let's think about what a riot is. A riot starts with a message and an agenda, and then simply works its way into the ability to get away with stuff, right? It's an opportunity to go do horrible shit that you otherwise couldn't get away with. Fact.
Well, let me tell you this. Like I said, when I started in 1980, we just got through a major riot. I had 4 riots. There are newspaper articles written back almost 40 years now, I guess, however long ago that was, and the same complaints that everybody had, or the same justification that they had to riot, loot, and burn back then, are the same complaints and justifications they use to do it today. Now, why hasn't that changed? They elect Democrats, they elect Democratic mayors and councilmen and county commissioners. This is why they elect their own race, their own religion, their own whatever they do to try to make it right, because this is what they're told, and then nothing changes. Nobody asks that question.
Well, a lot of that's a popularity contest. You know what I mean?
Well, it is, but the sad part is that the citizens that want these changes, and like I said, a lot of it's poverty driven. They complain about poverty, they complain about bad schools, they complain about housing conditions, and then of course they complain about the police departments. The police departments nationwide are the only government organizations that have done anything to change. And they have. Every police department has evolved from what it was in 1980 to what it is today, and it's still ever evolving. Community relations based. Every department has it. Every department is reaching out to everybody. But yet something will happen. They will riot. There will be riots, and that'll be the same complaints. So I don't think that's ever going to change, because, like you said, it's an opportunity to steal, to loot, to burn, to create havoc and chaos. And nowadays you do it without any repercussions.
Yeah, and that's not, I mean, I hear a lot of that, and it's not being spoken about widely, and I don't understand why. You know, I mean, that's a horrible thing.
It's horrible because people are afraid of backlash. You know, Black Lives Matter has a lot of political clout, unfortunately. And if you're a politician and you say something that they deem to be racist or wrong, they're coming after you, and people are afraid of that. You have police chiefs that let Seattle and Portland burn and let police stations get and take. You wouldn't have had that shit in the 80s when I was working. You know, you don't want thugs taking over your police department and torching it, but they do. And that's just the way of the world, because that's the mindset of those police chiefs and those commanders, because that's the kind of people that the citizens wanted to hire, because they were anti-law enforcement. And these individuals came in and said, well, we're going to coddle the criminals and take, the peace, love, and happiness type persons that runs a city as far as law enforcement. Didn't work. Didn't work.
This is why I have like this belief system, my own belief system. I really, truly, honestly have no position. I'm apolitical. I have no position in anything. So my position is simple. It's, if you want a race, be human. And if you want a religion, call it humanity. And if you want a place of origin, call it Earth. It should be that simple, you would think.
Absolutely. Listen, the idea, I'll just say this, the idea that, every white police officer is racist. It's bullshit. Okay. But that's what the left-wing media wants you to hear. That's what the liberal politicians, and that's what, some of these organizations, that's what they put out there. And now all of a sudden, every white police officer is supposed to be considered a racist. And there, again, the furthest thing from the truth is that is the biggest fallacy out there. Again, if I'm a white police officer and you put me in Liberty City, I'm not going to say I don't want to work there because there's black people. Bullshit. I'm going to help these people. And that's every officer that I worked with in my 30-some year career.
Yeah, these are fellow humans at the end of the day.
Right. Listen, they're human. They're people. They need help. We're there to help them, and love doing it. And that still works today. It's still the truth today. Before current times, before all this now, right?
There was that kind of like in between time in 2008, 2009. And I watched this show, and I was really proud to have Lenny DePaul on the show because I love the show. Have you ever seen it, Manhunters? Criminal?
Sure.
My goodness. Sure. If you want to see true diversity in law enforcement, just look at that group of people. Those individuals were from every race and every background and every culture, and they work together like a family unit. I remember watching that show and wanting to be in law enforcement, watching that show. I was, even to this day, I'm still impressed with it. We need more of it.
If you want to get a true reading on law enforcement, police officers, homicide detectives, if you want to get a true reading on what goes on in the inner cities, watch First 48. Pick any city, start with City of Miami, and you're going to see what really goes on in an investigation, how the detectives work together. And they're white, they're black, they're Hispanic, they're male, they're female, some of the best people in the world on these police departments that do that job. And you see how that job is done in the inner city. And unfortunately, that's where your murders are occurring. That's where your shootings are occurring. That's where everything is going on. And that's where those detectives are spending a lot of their days while working homicides. It's not, you don't get many homicides in the suburbs. You don't get many homicides outside of those boundaries of the inner cities nationwide, because unfortunately, that's where the violence is. That's where the drugs are. That's where the guns are. And that's where the drug dealers are. And they run those neighborhoods. They put the fear of God into the law-abiding citizens in those neighborhoods, and they create the havoc. And they're the ones that are spilling the blood. But you watch those detectives from any major city that's on that show, and you see how they work. And the only thing they want to do is help the family members of the victim and get the bad guy, and race, color, creed doesn't even come into that picture at all.
No, and it shouldn't, because you're bringing peace of mind to a family regardless.
Listen, you can't do this job and be a racist. I'm sorry. It doesn't work that way, because if you are, it's going to come out real quick.
Yep.
And somebody's going to pick up on it, and you might if you are, you try to hide it. Like I say, you might be able to get away with it in certain jobs, but let me tell you something. You ain't going to be that way as a homicide detective.
Yeah, I'm reaching out to more law enforcement agencies. I have more detectives coming on. I really want to get more cold case stories on the show, more missing persons cases, because I really think it would be great to shed new light on certain things. Like I was talking to a couple of detectives about this. You don't know who might listen to the show, and a light bulb goes off, and they have the information to fix that case. We don't know. It takes that one person, that at-home sleuth, who will just immediately figure it out, and that could be the game changer. So the problem I run into, I get a lot of the retired guys, and I appreciate them because that's the experience for days. But for relevant cases of missing persons and relevant cases of cold cases, real time, some of the on-duty guys, it's really hard for me to get on the show. And I understand why. I get it. I want them to understand, though, this is a friendly platform. And my only goal here is to get that message out there and for someone's family to have peace of mind at the end of the day.
I totally agree with you. From my experience, unless you can get that cleared through their public information officer, through their commander, through their lieutenant, to try to get that out there. Not saying it can't be done, but, a lot of times when you're working cold cases, you don't really want to advertise that you're working the case.
Right. Yeah, I understand.
Not till you really have to, not until you get to the point where either you've got a warrant for the individual you're looking for, now you need help finding him, or you've already made the arrest, and then you're, it's a little bit easier to talk about. But it's so hard because when you get into a format like this and discuss your case and you make an arrest, one of the things that a defense attorney will do is maybe find out about, like, this interview that I'm doing with you.
Yeah, okay? Chain of custody.
And now they pull it and they listen to it, and now they start challenging you on statements you made and just talking and shooting the shit. You may say something you really didn't mean to say, or something didn't come out quite the way you wanted it to. So now they have to deal with that as well.
Right.
The best time to get that interview with that detective is when the arrest has been made, the conviction has been had, and the son of a bitch that did the murder is sitting in prison. Then they'll talk your ear off because they want you to know how it happened. It's a little bit different than when you get a fresh case, because when you get a fresh case, the media is already on it.
Yeah.
Right. It's fresh and everybody's aware of it.
And that's the other thing too. The fresh case it can work against law enforcement if it's on the media, right? Because
it depends. There's
the criminal could listen to the show. I'm like, all right, well, I know what they're doing now.
Well, listen, the criminal's going to listen to the show. He's going to watch the news. Every criminal watches the news to see what's going on in the case. But the detective can give you an interview, or gives an interview. If you just watch certain, local newscasts, I did many of them when I was, working, where you'll give out just enough information to let the public know what's going on, but you won't give out enough that's going to harm your case, or it's going to help the bad guy. But that's part of the experience and part of that aspect of handling this kind of case.
And as far as missing persons, I found an advocate I'm going to reach out to, because I've shared it a couple times. I'm going to get her on the show just because I could tell she really wants to solve some of these missing persons cases, and they're going back to the 2000s, late 90s.
Listen, now that's a whole different ballgame. You've got a missing person out there somewhere. Any and all information should be disseminated, and they do that. I mean, that's why you see the posters. That's why you see the ads. That's why if you watch America's Most Wanted or one of those shows, at the end they'll put up information about a missing person. You go into Publix supermarket and you may see a bunch of flyers. That information, if you've got a detective that's working a missing person case, that detective needs to be out there. Somebody from the police department needs to be out there, just like they did a few weeks ago when the young girl was missing, when the Brian Laundrie case.
Yeah,
that thing was on TV every day, and somebody was talking about it. So that's when you want it. And unfortunately, there are thousands of missing persons cases nationwide. I mean, and the other thing is, some of these cases are real, and people are victimized. And then unfortunately you have other cases where individuals decide to run away or leave their family and just go live their lives, and they don't want anybody to find them.
Yeah.
And those are the ones, but you can't separate them because you really don't know.
Yeah. In either case, they're missing, right?
Right. As far as, until they're found, they're going to be considered missing. And sometimes, later on, when a lot of these young people that do this, as they get a little bit older or they've had enough of trying to stay hidden, they'll appear and the family will find out about it. And a lot of them, and it's even local, you'll see the local news. And we just had one, a 14-year-old girl missing, and the story goes out, and the next day, she's been found. But you never hear the circumstances around it, because a lot of times it's that person took it upon themselves to do what they did. They weren't really missing.
Right.
They just took off with the boyfriend, or they did something stupid, which is fine. The bottom line is they're found and they're safe. Right. And that's what you want.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, a family has peace of mind, however it came. However, I'm even considering.
Exactly. But the media will jump all over this missing person, especially a young person. They'll get it out.
I think at the end of every podcast coming up, I'm going to start attaching a missing persons file.
That's a good idea.
I mean,
wherever you think your audience is listening, fine. All you got to do is Google it. I'm sure you'll come up with missing persons in that location, in that area. That's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna at the very minimum, I can start doing that. I'm gonna start researching what I have to do. Because why not?
Absolutely.
Circling back to you before we close out, we'll talk about your career in homicide and how you got to that.
Yeah, I really had no aspirations on being a homicide detective. I after I left uniform, I was a street detective in a Crime Suppression Team in Liberty City, and basically it was chasing robbers and burglars and drug dealers, and we had a lot of that in the area. And then I did that for a year and a half, and then I was asked if I wanted to be a robbery detective, and I said yes. So for 14 years, I was a robbery detective, and that was a great job. I mean, back in those days, we had tourist robbers, we had Rolex robbers, we had home invasion robbers, police impersonator robbers. I mean, Miami was ground zero for carjackings, you name it. It all started in Miami. When you hear home invasion, that started in Miami because we had a lot of drugs and a lot of money.
Right.
So there was a lot of robberies. And after 14 years, one of my sergeants in robbery, Tony Monheim, went to homicide along with a couple other of my partners in robbery. And he asked me one day if I wanted to go to homicide. This was 1996. And at that time, I was getting a little tired of picking up robberies. And I said, you know what, let me give it a shot. And that was probably the best career move I made. So for my last 14 years on the police department, I was a homicide detective. And when you're a homicide detective, you don't just handle homicides. You handle all kinds of death-related cases. It could be accidental deaths. It could be suicides. It could be suicides. It could be homicides, suicides, drownings. The problem with it is you have a range of victims from young kids to very elderly and everything in between. And it
takes a toll.
It takes a toll. And unfortunately for me, I had to handle cases where children of police officers drowned. I had police officers whose family members committed suicide, police officers who committed suicide. I mean, so you handle and you deal with a lot of that kind of stuff. And then you have your murders where you have a totally innocent person, the pizza delivery guy or the person working in the 7-Eleven or somebody at the ATM machine that gets murdered. And then you have your drug-related homicides where the guy's a drug dealer and they go into robbing, but in the interim they kill him. We had handled quite a few gang-related murders where you have two factions of gangs going after each other. One of the gangs was called the Booby Boys. But if you Google that, you'll see what I was talking about. And then we had tit for tat murders all over Dade County with that group. And those guys were in action for 10 years before we finally shut them down. So it was very, very interesting. I learned a hell of a lot from that job. I could write books about cases, that either I handled or helped handle. And I wouldn't trade a minute.
Yeah,
being a detective for that, for anything.
It's a lot of things too, right? It's a hero role, but it comes at a price because you're again what you said. You're seeing a lot of things that make it hard to sleep at night.
Well, if you let it get to you, it can and it will. And the downside or the tough side of being a homicide detective is you got to write reports. And reports aren't 3 pages long. Some of them are hundreds and hundreds of pages long. I mean, we had one of my friends handled the value jet crash some years ago. And if you don't think that's not a 400 or 500 page report, things like that you got to handle.
That's a novel.
It's a novel. It's a book. You got to testify. And in Florida, we have depositions. So you could be in depositions with a defense attorney for 2 or 3 days on a homicide case. And then you have what they call an Arthur hearing, which is like a bond hearing. I had one that went for 6 weeks to try the guy that killed his wife. And unfortunately, the judge relinquished and gave him a bond, $1 million bond, but he gave him a bond, and the guy was able to bond out.
Wow.
So you see things like that. It's frustrating. We eventually got him convicted. You're not just, you come into work one day and you're not scheduled for anything. You say, okay, today's the day I'm going to write my report. And you're in your chair for 5 minutes and then all of a sudden you got a police shooting. Or you got multiple victims and they need help. And now you got to go. You picked up 3 homicides and you're ready to go home. Oh, sorry, you can't go home because, an officer just got shot. But that's what you signed up for.
Right.
And that was part of the gig. And if you didn't love it, you weren't very good at it.
What would be one of the cases that I would say bothered you the most?
Martin Luther King Day. 5-year-old girl was at the parade with her cousin, I believe. Her mother was also at the parade, but she had asked a cousin or an aunt, I forget which it was, to babysit her 5-year-old daughter. Well, that person brought the daughter out, and every year they have a big parade in Liberty City. This was at the end of the day, about 5 o'clock, and myself and my partner were already out because we had a murder the night before, so we were doing an area cam, so we heard the gunfire. And we heard the call go out. We responded over, and there she was lying on the ground. Fire rescue had just pulled up, and she got shot in the head. And they loaded her onto the fire rescue unit, took her to the hospital where she subsequently died.
Yeah.
Now, my team got the case. I was new to homicide. I didn't have the case, but we had hundreds of witnesses, and, of course, hundreds of witnesses, and nobody saw anything. One of those deals.
Yep.
But we got a phone call, and that led us to a couple individuals. We found them, brought them into the homicide office, and I was able to obtain a confession from the shooter. And he told me that he thought there was somebody across the street from him. His gun was already out because he was involved in an altercation. He thought he was being shot at, so he returned gunfire and shot this little girl in the head. He said he didn't mean to do it, of course. But that was a tough case to handle, but it was a great case to solve.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see the ups and downs of that. It's a tragedy. Absolutely. And then, being able to solve it for the parents. Yeah.
Anything with a kid or a child is, and unfortunately I had many, many of those cases where children were killed or died by accident or drowning or whatever it was, babies, SIDS deaths, you name it, you handle it. Those are all real tough, but you don't get personal with it. You try to keep it at arm's length, just be professional about it, and that is why it's important to have good relations with not only your partners at work, but with your family. With your wife and your daughters and your sons, because they understand you're going to miss a lot of holidays and putting in a lot of time and couldn't tell you how many times on Christmas I had to go out to work, when I wasn't even working that day or other holidays. And that's the life of a homicide detective. That's nationwide. I don't care if it's a 5-man department or New York City PD. If you're working homicide, holidays don't mean shit.
Yeah. And I mean, imagine, there's another thing too about being close to family. You're pursuing people who murder people,
Right.
So you're putting every single time you go to work, you're putting your life on the line, period.
Listen, yeah, every police officer that gets into a police car or does anything is putting their life on the line, not just homicide.
Yeah, that's true. That's truth. In the area you work too, especially in that part of Florida, a lot of serial killer cases out there. More than I thought, by the way. I was maybe not naive. I'm not gonna say, I was just unaware of the amount of cases revolving around that.
Yeah, there's probably every county in the state of Florida has had a serial killer.
Yeah, that shocked me to hear that. Like the amount,
Yeah.
the sheer numbers shocked me.
Well, a lot of it, I'll say Florida's a very transient
Yeah.
state, and you have a lot of bad guys that have done things up north or out west, and for whatever reason, they come to Florida. They figure they can hide here and disappear, go to the Keys, whatever it is, and then of course, if they're a serial killer, they're not going to stop killing.
Yep.
There's
keep in mind, I came to Florida from New York. And when I came here as a kid, so did kids from Chicago, LA, all the big cities moved here. All the parents said, we're going to go to Florida, start over again. It's going to be great there. And what they did is they made the biggest melting pot of all the big cities in one state.
Listen, it wasn't unusual to be on a squad on my department and have guys from Michigan, Ohio, New York, California, Georgia. Our department, when they recruited me, they went nationwide recruiting. That's how bad they needed people to become police officers down there. They were taking these guys from these small departments up north and Boston and surrounding cities, and like I said, Michigan and Ohio. And they were paying their way down here. They were paying to move their furniture down here. They were paying money up front to come down here. So what we had on our police department was a big, like you just said, a big potpourri of every nationality and
every kind of group.
Listen, when I left, there were Cuban officers, Haitian officers, freaking Jamaican officers, white officers, Hispanic, you name it. And it was great. And you need that because that's Miami. If you don't have representation on your police department, you can't function because, number one, there's a language barrier.
Yeah.
And there's also cultural barriers that, you learn as you start to deal with different cultures. And it helps to have your partner if he's Cuban and you're dealing with Cuban victims, especially if they don't speak English, and that's a lot of that. And I found out, once we had the Haitians coming into Miami, that was a whole different ballgame, because we didn't have Haitian officers until later. So you had to learn as you went. And the Haitian people at that time didn't really trust the police because in Haiti, they had what they call the Tantam Makoups. That was the police regime, and that was ruled by the president of Haiti. I forget his name. But they weren't for the people. They were nasty, and they thought we were Tantam Makoups. So, a lot of these people would get robbed, and I mean viciously robbed and hurt, and they wouldn't call us because they were afraid of us. And then finally we broke that barrier. And fortunately we did because there are some damn violent Haitian gangs in Miami today, as there were when I was working.
Yeah. Got to tell you, too, when you have a lot of culture mixed up, it becomes that who's better aspect taking place in those communities. And that alone could incite a war.
Well, they had that, there was the blacks that fought the Haitians, the Hispanics that fought the blacks, the whites that fought, everybody, like you said, everybody, it's a turf war.
Yep. And then you have the police right in the middle where they have to balance this out.
Right. Exactly right. And like I say, today, these police departments in Miami-Dade and Broward County, if you go down there and you look at the diversity, and again, like I said earlier, the police departments are the only government agency that's done any improvement in that field. They're the ones that get the brunt of the shit, but they're the only ones that have done anything to try to make it right. By hiring minorities and learning about these communities, helping these communities, and it just pisses me off every time somebody denigrates the police department because it's a lie.
Yeah, these are people with, again, we're in a current era of likes and shares and views, and that's unfortunately that's most of the drive. And it's scary to hear that because, again, you look at the police departments in every city and you try to imagine the individuals living there trying to solve their own problems. I promise that never goes well, ever.
No.
So
you can try, but eventually, if you're in a bad situation, you need the police.
Yeah.
The other thing that I would recommend, and I always do this, especially the most anti-police people, I say, listen, get into a police car, do a ride along. go into the worst part of the city, wherever you live, whatever part of the country you're in. I don't care how bad you hate the police. Go do a ride along with a police officer. Spend 8 hours in that car. See how that goes for you.
Yeah.
And see what you think about. Now, listen, if you're so anti-police, it may not change anything about the way you think, or at least you may not let anybody know, but deep down inside, you're going to say, son of a bitch, this is a tough job. And they're pretty damn good at it.
Yeah.
And I think if more people were made to do that, to understand, what the officers deal with on a daily, this is a daily basis. This isn't a one-time, you may only ride for 8 hours, but every uniform officer every day in every city deals with the same stuff every day.
Yep.
And then you throw in, the day where somebody decides to try to kill a police officer, ambush a police officer, put that on top of that cake and see how that works.
Yeah. And that's 8 hours of someone saying, that's crazy. How do they deal with that? That's just Tuesday for that officer. Right.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
People need a new perspective bad. And now's the time. And, we really got to start appealing to the young people about getting involved with police, because it's believe it or not, it's an enormous part of the community. It represents a large part of every community, police. It has been that way since the start.
The problem, there's a problem there, because if you go into these schools nowadays, a lot of teachers and a lot of these educators denigrate the police in these schools. And if you, God forbid, you wear a shirt that has a police flag on it, they want to throw you out. They want to call you racist. I mean, they really hate the police.
That's crazy.
And that comes from the top down. The people that run these school boards, and they're anti-police. When I was going through school, they had police programs where in high school you could join a program to learn how to be a cop and how to respect the police. Those are the kind of programs they need more of, to open up those eyes of those individuals being told that the police are bad. When I grew up, you didn't tell your kids that the police were bad. You didn't do that.
No, not at all.
Today, they not only do they say the police are bad, the police are killers, the police are racist, the police hate you. And why would you want to be a cop if that's all you hear, going through school?
That's really unfortunate, man. I really hope, I predict that this all stops within the next couple of years.
I think it will.
I think some things are going to come to light. I'm hopeful that we start coming together as a community worldwide. I'm hopeful that some of the cities with the major tragedies taking place in it, some leadership, and doesn't matter what flag they're flying, some leadership's got to look and see it's time to change.
Exactly. Listen, if you tell me you're a left-wing liberal, but you support law enforcement, you want to put bad guys in jail, you got my vote. Yeah. I don't care.
That's how listen, I've never had a political party growing up. I just base it on, do I think this guy's going to do a good job? And that's how I vote.
That's cool. But that's how it's supposed to be. But it's, it's very partisan nowadays. And,
it's become,
obviously you can tell it's affected me.
Yeah, of course.
Maybe if I wasn't a police officer, I wouldn't be as harsh on the left-wing liberals as I am. But I'm sorry, when I see how they let the police get treated today, I'm sorry. Those are my brothers and sisters out there. Leave them the fuck alone.
I agree. I support it completely. Look, I can't say it enough. Without police, we'd be in chaos, period.
Absolutely.
Well, Jeffrey, before we close, is there anything you want to add?
I just appreciate the opportunity to talk.
Fantastic,
and, hopefully, man. Somebody that might listen to this might get a little different perspective on law enforcement.
Well, we'll get it out there. That's the goal. Well, Jeffrey, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I know I'm going to have you on again. Beyond a doubt, I know it.
All right. I appreciate it. Good luck.
You too, man. Have a good night, Jeffrey.
All right. Take care.